Imagine being just 10 years old, but instead of playing with friends, you're forced to become someone's wife. This isn't a nightmare. This is reality. A reality lived by thousands of little girls, hidden behind closed doors, their voices unheard, their pain unseen. But one girl refused to stay silent. One girl dared to fight back. Her name is Nojoom. And today, you will hear her story, a story so heartbreaking, so powerful, that it changed an entire nation. But here's the real question. Will her struggle be enough to change the future? Or will history keep repeating itself? Maybe today's video is longer than usual, but I promise you, every second of it will grip your heart, challenge your thoughts, and open your eyes to a truth the world often ignores. Stay with me till the end. The story begins with a little girl sitting in silence. Her name is Nojoom, the heart of today's story. Her mother pulls out a few coins from the edge of her shawl and asks Nojoom to buy bread. Wrapping her scarf, she steps out. But before she can leave, a voice stops her. "Where are you going?" Her husband asks. "Yes, you heard that right. Nojoom is just 10 years old, and she is married." At the bakery, she waits in line, clutching the money. But as the shopkeeper calls for payment, a haunting memory flashes through her mind. Something shifts inside her. She turns and walks away. Stepping outside, she waves for a taxi. But just as she's about to get in, Avil, her husband, catches up. He orders the driver to leave. In that tense moment, Nojoom pulls herself free from his grip and runs, darting through the narrow streets of Yemen, desperate to escape. Nojoom's husband chases after her, but she runs as fast as she can, weaving through the narrow streets. With every step, her desperation grows. Finally, she escapes. She jumps into a taxi, breathless. The driver, surprised to see a child alone, asks where she wants to go. Without hesitation, she says, "To the court." The taxi arrives, and Nojoom steps out. The courthouse is crowded. Hundreds of people waiting, security checks in progress. Fear grips her, but she forces herself forward. As she moves through the crowd, she accidentally collides with a woman and falls to the ground. The woman helps her up, surprised to see a little girl alone. Nojoom explains that she has come to see a judge, though she doesn't know who to look for. The woman, sensing the urgency in her voice, decides to help and leads her inside. A courtroom trial is underway. Nojoom watches intently, her wide eyes fixed on the proceedings. Coincidentally, the woman who brought her in is standing before the judge, pleading for justice against her abusive husband. She shows the bruises, painful marks of her suffering. As the session ends, people begin to leave. But Nojoom stays behind, sitting in the now empty courtroom, waiting for justice, for hope, for someone to listen. As the judge prepares to leave, his eyes fall on a little girl sitting quietly in the empty courtroom. Something about her stillness makes him pause. Concerned, he approaches her and asks why she is there. Nojoom looks up, her voice unwavering. She wants a divorce. The judge is stunned, as if he didn't hear her correctly. He asks her to repeat herself, but Nojoom doesn't hesitate. With the same quiet determination, she says it again. The judge stares at her in disbelief. A divorce? But she's just a child. Is she even married? Nojoom nods. Intrigued, the judge leans in, his voice softer now. He asks her to tell her story. And for the first time, Nojoom begins to speak. The story takes us back to the night Nojoom was born, under the dim glow of a flickering lamp. Her elder sister gently cradled the newborn in her arms, wrapping her in a soft cloth, just as their mother had instructed. Moments later, their brother eagerly asked for the baby's name. With a warm smile, the sister whispered, "Her name is Nojoom," which means the stars in the sky. And so, little Nojoom's journey began. She grew up in a home filled with love and laughter, often riding on her father's shoulders, her giggles echoing through their mountain village. The family worked in harmony, raising sheep, their lives simple yet joyful. Nojoom spent her days playing with her younger brother, Sammy, and learning to care for the animals. One day, Nojoom's father brought home a cow and instructed the children to keep it tied securely. Before leaving, he told the family that he was taking Sammy to another village and might return late. Nojoom stayed behind with her elder sister, watching as her father and Sammy disappeared into the distance. When Sammy arrived at their destination, a woman rushed toward him, embracing him tightly, her face filled with overwhelming affection. The woman embracing Sammy was his and Nojoom's mother. She had left their home in anger and returned to her father's house. Now, their father had come to bring her back, but the tension was heavy. Nojoom's grandfather confronted his son-in-law. He knew about the second marriage, and the cow given as dowry. It had been sold. Lowering his voice, Nojoom's father pleaded. He never wanted another wife. His father had forced him into it. He had no choice, but he had tried to make things right. He had bought a new cow for Nojoom's mother. After a long silence, the old man spoke. It wasn't his decision to make. If his daughter wished to return, he wouldn't object. Back in their house, a boy arrived at the house and asked for their father. Nojoom's elder sister replied. He wasn't home. The boy hesitated, then asked for a drink of water. Trusting him, she stepped inside to fetch it. But before she could react, he followed her in, shutting the door behind him. What happened next needs no explanation. A terrified scream shattered the silence. Little Nojoom, sitting nearby, began to cry. She didn't fully understand, but she could feel the horror in her sister's voice. Unfortunately, no one was there to hear her cries, no one to help. The scene shifts. Nojoom's family descends a mountain, leaving their village behind forever. Villagers watch from afar, puzzled by their sudden departure. At the mountain's base, an old jeep waits. They climb in, and the rough journey begins. The road is harsh, the ride uncomfortable, but they endure it in silence. For Nojoom and Sammy, it's a new world. They've never seen a proper road, never ridden in a vehicle. Their wide eyes take in everything as the jeep rumbles toward the city. Looking back, their village fades into a distant, memories left behind, an uncertain future ahead. Despite the sorrow, little Nojoom finds wonder in the journey. The passing scenery mesmerizes her. Finally, the jeep reaches Yemen's bustling capital, Sana'a. The towering buildings, the chaos of the streets. It's unlike anything they've ever known. After weaving through the crowded roads, the jeep turns into a narrow alley and comes to a stop. The driver turns to Nojoom's father and says, "This is the address. You'll need to get off here." Nojoom's father steps out, then asks the family to follow. Adjusting her scarf, Nojoom climbs down as they enter their new home. But as they look around, their hearts sink. The house is tiny, cramped, suffocating. Nojoom's mother, visibly upset, questions her husband. How could they all live in a place this small? With a resigned sigh, he explains, this was all they could afford with the little money they had left. A heavy silence fills the room. Meanwhile, Nojoom slips out. The city is a world of wonder, colorful, alive. She wanders until she stumbles upon a playground. From behind a wall, she watches children laughing, playing, girls her age, carefree and happy. Noticing her, they call out, inviting her to join. For the first time in a long while, Nojoom laughs. For a moment, the weight of her family's struggles fades away. That evening, the neighborhood comes alive with wedding celebrations. Music fills the air as men gather to sing. Curious, Nojoom and her elder sister step outside. They make their way to see the bride, draped in a stunning white gown. Nojoom is mesmerized. Whispering to her sister, she says, "I want to wear a dress like this at my wedding." Her sister frowns, scolding her. "It's late. They should go home." Reluctantly, Nojoom follows. The scene shifts. It is Nojoom's wedding day. At the cleric's house, her father and Adil sit across from each other, with two witnesses present. The ceremony begins. Following tradition, Nojoom's father gives away his little girl in marriage. Dates are passed around in celebration. Meanwhile, at home, women prepare for the gathering. Nojoom is being dressed, but she still doesn't understand what marriage truly means. As her mother fastens the dress, Nojoom protests. It's not the white gown she had dreamed of, but her mother's voice is firm. She must wear whatever her husband has given her, even the wedding ring. meant for a child bride, slides loosely from her tiny fingers. Nojoom stands before the women, dressed as a bride. They clap, welcoming her. Overwhelmed, she shyly retreats to a corner. Just then, a friend arrives, gesturing for her to come outside. Curious, Nojoom slips away. Her friend asks, "Why are you dressed like this? Why didn't you come to play?" Nojoom mutters, "I don't know. My mom made me wear it." Without hesitation, she removes the dress and runs to the playground. For a moment, she is just a child again, playing, laughing free. Nojoom's friend notices the ring on her tiny finger. It's far too big, but Nojoom is already aware. Her friend then says, "I know a shop where you can get it resized." As they walk toward the shop, Nojoom's attention is caught by a doll in a store window. She's instantly drawn to it. Afterward, Nojoom and her friend visit the jeweler's shop. Nojoom makes a sudden decision. Instead of resizing the ring, Nojoom decides to sell it. With the money, she buys something that catches her eye. That beautiful doll. Excited, she rushes to show her friends. Their eyes light up with amazement. For a brief moment, Nojoom forgets everything. Her home, her wedding, the life awaiting her. She's just a child, lost in the joy of a simple toy. But happiness never lasts long. Sammy finds her and calls her home. Still holding the doll, Nojoom follows him. But as they near the house, their father appears. His eyes darken the moment he sees her. The sight of the doll fills him with rage. Without a word, he snatches it from her hands and hurls it away. Nojoom's heart shatters. Tears spill down her cheeks as she watches the doll, the only piece of happiness she had, disappear into the dust. But there's no time to cry. Her father grabs her roughly, covering her mouth to silence her sobs, and drags her towards the house. As soon as they arrive home, Nojoom's father instructs her mother to get her ready. Her husband is waiting. But Nojoom is still crying, longing for her lost doll. Her mother gently strokes her hair, whispering words of comfort. This is how life is for girls like them. One day, they all must leave for their husband's home. Just then, a little girl appears, clutching something in her hands. It's the doll. Nojoom's face lights up as she hugs it tightly, but the moment is fleeting. Before she can process her emotions, her father takes her by the hand, leading her outside. A car is waiting. Without hesitation, he lifts her inside. Turning to Adil, he speaks firmly. His daughter is now in his care. Adil nods, offering quiet assurance. With a heavy heart, the family watches as the car pulls away. Nojoom sits quietly in the car, clutching her doll tightly against her chest. Her innocent eyes scan the bustling streets outside. Then, she sees her brother, Sammy. He is crammed into the back of a truck filled with children heading to work. Her heart leaps as she calls his name, pounding on the glass. But the car doesn't stop. Her voice doesn't reach him. The city fades behind them as they head toward a remote village. Upon arrival, a crowd is waiting. Adil's family stands alongside the village chief, who fires a gunshot into the air in celebration. The deafening bang jolts Nojoom. She shrinks into herself, gripping the doll even tighter. A group of women approach, their voices soft but unfamiliar. They gently guide her out of the car, still clutching the doll. Her only comfort. Nojoom steps forward into a world that feels nothing like her own. Around her, the village erupts in song and cheers. But inside, she is drowning in silence. At the house, the women perform an elaborate welcoming ritual. The unfamiliar customs, the sea of unknown faces. Everything feels overwhelming. An elderly woman, who seems to be in charge, leads Nojoom to a small room. This is where she will stay now. The woman introduces herself as Nojoom's mother-in-law before turning away, leaving the little girl alone. Silence fills the space. Fear creeps in. Nojoom gently lays her doll beside her, as if seeking comfort from its presence. That evening, she joins the family for dinner. Her mother-in-law speaks to her, explaining things in a firm yet instructive tone. Nojoom listens but barely comprehends. Elsewhere in the village, the men are lost in music and laughter, their voices echoing into the night. Amidst the celebration, Adil quietly excuses himself. He He is heading home. As soon as Adil arrives, his mother begins voicing her frustrations. Her sharp tone cuts through the air. Nojoom had spent the entire day in silence, refusing to engage with anyone. Adil tries to soothe her. Everything will be fine. Nojoom is just new here. By tomorrow, she'll start helping with chores. That's why he brought her, to be shaped into whatever they want her to be. Sitting nearby, Nojoom hears every word, but she remains silent. Then, her husband calls for her. His voice is firm, yet patient. Fear grips her. She doesn't move. Moments later, Adil strides toward her, grabbing her roughly, and he drags her into the room. The little girl's cries pierce the night, echoing through the house, drowning in anguish and despair. The next morning, Nojoom is jolted awake by the harsh scolding of her mother-in-law. Sleeping late is not allowed here. Her day begins with fetching water from the base of a steep hill. The climb back up is grueling, but it is only the beginning. Her small hands toil endlessly, hauling grass, working in the fields, collecting grains. At home, the burden of cooking rests entirely on her 10-year-old shoulders. Day after day, the relentless cycle continues. Exhaustion settles deep within her bones. One day, she sits at the edge of a high cliff, staring at the endless horizon. The wind brushes against her face, but nothing feels freeing. Adil approaches from behind. She doesn't turn, doesn't move. If he comes any closer, she swears she will jump. Adil pauses, startled. He asks what's wrong, but Nojoom already knows. He knows everything. She doesn't want this life. She wants freedom. Adil only scoffs. If she stays out here too long, the wild animals might get to her first. Nojoom doesn't move. Just then, a distant howl rises from the darkness, the eerie cries of hyenas echoing through the cliffs. Before she can react, Adil grabs her, dragging her away. That night is pure horror. His fists land mercilessly. His voice is ice cold. She is nothing but a price paid, a possession bought. By morning, the bruises remain, but her freedom is gone. She is forbidden from stepping outside. Desperate, she tries to escape but fails. Feeling trapped, she locks herself in the bathroom. The walls close in. She presses her head against the cold surface and begins banging, again and again, trying to drown the torment inside her. Hours slip by in this endless cycle. When Adil returns, his mother complains. Nojoom has locked herself inside all day. Not a single sound. Overcome with panic, he forces the door open. Inside, Nojoom lies unconscious on the cold floor. Lifting her limp body, he carries her outside. His mother's scolding is sharp. This girl is insolent, ungrateful. Perhaps sending her back home for a few days will teach her a lesson. Then the scene shifts. Nojoom is back at her parents' house. She throws herself into her mother's arms, sobbing, broken, utterly lost. Nojoom's mother strokes her back gently, whispering words of comfort. Meanwhile, Adil enters. Nojoom's father welcomes him warmly, offering hospitality as if nothing is wrong. Nojoom quickly retreats to another room with her mother. Once alone, the tears come freely. She clings to her mother, her voice trembling. She never wants to go back. That house is a prison. That man is a monster. Lowering her voice further, she confesses the horrors of her nights, whispers of pain, humiliation, and fear. Her mother listens, but her response is firm. Adil is her husband. He has rights over her. Something inside Nojoom shatters. She looks into her mother's eyes, searching, pleading, but all she finds is silence. Disbelief washes over her. Her mother has changed, just like her father. Meanwhile, Adil sits with her father, painting a picture of disobedience and defiance, justifying every cruelty. Later, when her father approaches, Nojoom falls at his feet, sobbing. She will obey anything, do anything, just don't send her back. But his voice is cold, unyielding. This is just a visit. She will return. The scene shifts back to the present. A security officer reminds the judge the court is closing. Turning to Nojoom, the judge explains that there is no law against child marriage. No clear solution exists. They will meet again in 2 days. As he leaves, he glances out the car window. Nojoom is still sitting there, silent, alone. Then, gesturing toward the car, he tells her to get in, and she does. They drive away, leaving the courthouse behind. Meanwhile, the judge's daughter, Miriam, waits outside her school. She is barely older than Nojoom. When they arrive, the judge introduces them before asking Miriam to take Nojoom to her room. Upstairs, Nojoom follows quietly. Downstairs, the judge speaks with his wife, explaining Nojoom's situation. Anger flares in her eyes. A married girl in the same room as their daughter? But when she storms in and sees Nojoom's tear-streaked face, the anger vanishes. Her voice softens. She asks for Nojoom's name. The little girl barely whispers her reply. Moments later, the judge's wife turns to her daughter. Nojoom will need fresh clothes. The next morning, a police car pulls in Nojoom's neighborhood. 2 officers step out, following the little girl as she leads them home. The moment Nojoom enters, her mother erupts, demanding to know where she has been. Then, her father arrives. Rage fills his eyes. His hands strike before words can. And when Adil appears, he shoves Nojoom toward him. Furious. Do whatever you want with her. Take her away. But Nojoom does not stay silent. She runs, straight to the officers, pointing at her father, at her husband. Her voice, steady, unwavering, accuses them both. The arrests happen on the spot. The entire neighborhood watches as her father and Adil are taken away. Confusion flickers across their faces. They do not yet understand. But the world does. News of Nojoom's story spreads like wildfire. The media descends upon Yemen, cameras flashing, voices echoing her name. Today, she stands in court. Her father and husband sit before the judge. The room is silent. Then, her lawyer rises. She speaks of a child, forced into marriage, stripped of her innocence, subjected to unspeakable horrors. A plea follows. Let Nojoom be granted her freedom. Let no child suffer this fate again. The judge turns to Adil. Does he have a lawyer? Adil scoffs. Why would I need one? I have done nothing wrong. The judge's eyes narrow. So the accusations are false? Adil remains defiant. This was a marriage, conducted under Islamic customs. Nothing more. The judge's voice sharpens. Did you truly follow those customs? I will return to that question soon enough. Now, his gaze shifts to Nojoom's father. Why did you marry off a child? Without hesitation, the man replies, It was my duty as a father. The judge presses further. How old is she? Silence for a moment. Then a lie. She is 13. But Nojoom silently shakes her head. Before more questions can be asked, a violent cough erupts from her father. His body convulses. Moments later, he collapses. The judge wastes no time. He orders immediate medical attention. The court is adjourned. Nojoom sits frozen. Fear creeps in. But her lawyer leans in, his voice steady. Everything will be okay. The next day, court proceedings resume. The judge turns to Nojoom's father. How old is she? Silence for a moment. Then, an indifferent reply. I don't know. The judge presses further. Why marry off a child? Nojoom's father claims, because it is common. Many girls her age are already wives. No one questions their parents, so why should I stand trial? The judge presses further. Is there any specific reason behind marrying off such a little girl? His gaze shifts uneasily. Finally, he admits, yes, there was fear. The judge demands to know more. Nojoom's father hesitates again, then lowers his voice. He cannot say it before everyone, only in private. The judge orders the courtroom to be cleared. Once the doors shut, Nojoom's father finally speaks. He was afraid that Nojoom would suffer the same fate as her older sister. Before he can say more, the doors burst open. Adil's village leader storms in, flanked by men. His voice is loud, demanding, why does the court have to keep Adil here? The judge remains calm. The village leader is adamant. Adil and his wife will return to the village. Their fate will be decided by their people, their customs. But the judge stands firm. He calmly replies, if you want to decide their fate, then please be patient and listen to what Nojoom's father has to say. Then, reluctantly, the village leader takes a seat. Nojoom's father begins to speak. His voice is heavy, laced with regret. Once he lived in peace, respected in his village. But that peace was shattered the day his eldest daughter's life was ruined by the son of the village morals leader. Fury consumed him. He wanted to kill the boy, but his wife begged him to seek justice instead. The village chief would have a solution, she insisted. So he went. The boy's father was summoned. A verdict was given. 2 cows, one for him, one for his daughter, and the boy would marry her. It was not justice, but it was the best he could get. So he accepted. But then the boy fled, and the whispers began. The entire village knew. His daughter, though innocent, could no longer show her face. And he, as a father, bore the weight of that shame. He couldn't step outside without feeling their stares, their judgment. The pain was unbearable, something only a father could understand. With no other choice, he sold everything, his sheep, his land, all for survival. With his entire family, Nojoom's father arrived in the city, his head lowered in defeat. But survival here was another battle. Work was scarce. No one would hire them. Hunger became their constant companion. Then came the landlord's final warning. 2 months' rent was due. If they didn't pay in 2 days, they would be thrown out. That night, shame filled Nojoom's father's voice. There was nothing left. No money. No food. The next day, desperation drove them to the streets. The children, hesitant and ashamed, stretched out their hands, begging for a few coins. But Nojoom, unable to bear the humiliation, moved away. But even in her shame, she found a way, turning a few coins into chocolates for her younger brother to sell. That night, desperation pushed Nojoom's father to a decision. A marriage proposal had come, one that promised shelter, security, and a chance to rebuild. A home in the city, money to start fresh. With tears in his eyes, he now turned to the judge. What else could I have done? What choice did I have? The judge's voice was calm but firm. There are always choices, but marrying off a child is never the answer. Nojoom's lawyer stands, presenting allegations against Adil. Adil remains defiant. These are private matters. Why should anyone interfere? Just then, the courtroom door opens. Sammy steps inside. All eyes turn to him. Nojoom lifts her hand, motioning for her brother to come sit beside her. Nojoom's lawyer continues, her voice steady yet urgent. This is not just about one girl. Across the country, thousands of children share Nojoom's fate. Many do not survive. Child marriages, forced pregnancies, silent deaths that society refuses to acknowledge. If Nojoom is denied justice today, countless others will be condemned to the same suffering. With those final words, she falls silent. A moment later, Adil's village chief rises. This is tradition, he argues. For generations, their ancestors, mothers, grandmothers were married young. It has always been this way. Adil, emboldened by these words, speaks up. He insists his marriage followed religious customs. The rituals were upheld. In his mind, that is all the justification he needs. The judge's voice hardens as he turns to Adil. What does it say, anywhere in the Quran or the teachings of the Prophet, that marrying a child is allowed? Adil stutters. He has no answer. The judge continues. Men like Adil twist religion to justify their actions. But faith does not permit cruelty. Now, his gaze shifts to the village chief. Forget everything else. Imagine Nojoom as your own daughter. A child, flesh and blood. At her age, she should be playing with dolls, not carrying the weight of a forced marriage. Are you truly doing the right thing? Silence for a moment. Then, the village chief steps toward Nojoom. His voice is softer now. She has nothing to fear. She must answer honestly. Does she want to go with Adil? Nojoom does not hesitate. Her voice is firm. No. The elder nods and says, then it is settled. Adil is ordered to divorce Nojoom. Reluctant, but with no choice, he complies. The judge's final words echo through the courtroom. From this moment, Nojoom is free. This case is closed. Outside, Nojoom walks away with the judge, a lightness in her step for the first time. But her father stands nearby, his head bowed in shame. He gestures for her to come to him. But Nojoom does not. She turns away. In that moment, Sammy steps forward, reaching for her hand. Nojoom grips it tightly, then buries herself in her brother's arms, finally finding comfort where it was always meant to be. News of Nojoom's divorce spreads across Yemen. On a moving bus, she sits by the window, lost in thought. A newspaper falls in front of her. Her own face stares back from the front page. Nojoom steps off the bus, walking toward a new beginning. The judge has enrolled her in school alongside his daughter. Her life is not ruined. Her childhood is not lost. For the first time, she is free to just be a child. And as Nojoom takes this step toward a future she never thought possible. So friends, Nojoom's story comes to an end here. But across the world, countless children still face the same fate, trapped in a cycle of suffering they never chose. How many dreams have been shattered? How many voices have been silenced before they could even be heard? We may never know the numbers, but we do know this. A child should never be a bride. A childhood should never be stolen. Nojoom's courage has paved the way for change. But the fight isn't over. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Let your voice be heard. And if you believe every child deserves a future free from fear, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stand with us in the fight for their freedom. Together, we can be the change